By the way, I can see that we've got people viewing but not joining.
Okay.
If you think we're that interesting, you can
please join us.
So. If you'd like to join,
Maybe
make this much better and more interesting for all of us, please do. I actually have a question about so I really liked your presentation and found parts of that pretty surprising. I guess one thing I wonder is like, and this is obviously just completely your opinion, but if you don't mind sharing it, what was the sort of the general feeling in the room, so to speak, compared to your discussions with executives like in March and April?
The feeling of the room?
Yeah, like, I mean, for me in any ways, like in March and April, I felt I didn't really have enough information to predict what was coming. I didn't really know where I was. Like, it was very shocking. It sort of feels like I'm getting into a little bit of a groove now, although it's kind of surreal. I'm just wondering how do you think people were feeling then compared to now? Was there a noticeable change? Do people feel like they've got
Yes.
predictability? Or
I got you, Matt. That's a great question. And my answer to that, and again, it's my lens from our business point of view, but my answer to that is, and it's almost like a curve that you can see. We did the V curve video a while ago, but hiring into the valley. But I think the initial, my interpretation was the initial few weeks of March, and maybe even on into April, were shock and awe. It was, how do I contend with this? On a personal level, on a professional level, I mean, our world was turned upside down. And I think that lasted. There were contingency plans, I know, being developed by pharmaceutical companies. You weren't able to get in now and to see doctors, to see surgeons, because, hey, there were no elective surgeries. So it was a whole new normal, in my view, in March and really into April, that people were getting acclimated to. And then what I think you started to do is, great guys like Mark and yourself, and maybe even me to a lesser extent, started to learn how to use Zoom, and figured out different ways that we could continue, in our business and to reach out to people. And part of that was video tech, obviously a big part of it. But we started to figure it out. Okay, we got to do something different. We got to start to figure this out. And so as that curve goes along, March, April, you start to see May and June people gathering a bit more confidence now. And that's why I think now we've started to really see more interest in hiring. People that I'm speaking with, whether they're buying from us or not, they're generally more comfortable now. And I think that comfort level, figuring out how to operate a lab, figuring out how to operate a manufacturing facility, just figuring all of that out, and knowing more about what this virus actually is. And I'm not going to say that maybe we're at a comfort level. I'm not going to with it yet. I'm not going to go so far as to say that. There was an amazing new piece out just today, or at least I just saw it today. We posted it on our company's LinkedIn page if you want to go and read it. But it had to deal with basically a supercomputer running genetic analysis against COVID-19. And the point is, we're discovering so much more about this disease. And I think people are generally getting a little more comfortable with the notion. So not that we shouldn't wear masks, because I'm a believer that we should, but I think we're getting more comfortable in our knowledge base of it. And so, no matter what your, comorbidities, no matter what your scenario may be personally, we've made a lot of scientific progress in the last 6 months, a tremendous amount. Unlike, this is like, having, and there's another great post that's coming out soon, but it's when you're forced to adapt and overcome, you do. So sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but I think there are a lot of aspects to that, and that's kind of the wave that I've seen, and that all of the evidence points towards things heading in an upwardly fashion from here.
That's really interesting that you point out that at least some of it is, the difference in feeling is that people are, and something so banal as they're getting comfortable with video chat. Like the technology that we're using for the office now. I mean, imagine if everyone was, from the 1700s suddenly got put in cubicles. Like, it might take them a few months to figure out how to do that, right? And we sort of got pulled from something we were very comfortable with to video chat and a whole lot of applications and stuff that just takes a few months to get used to. And I mean, now, like, case in point, you've done like a live presentation on a platform you've never used before. Like, do you think you would have jumped into that 3 years ago? I probably wouldn't have volunteered to facilitate. Certainly not, especially on my rural internet. But I've made do. I've figured out workarounds, and I'm getting comfortable to where my job is starting to feel much more doable than it did 6 months ago. And my biggest problems are no longer direct like impingement upon my abilities by the pandemic, and more kind of getting back to work stuff.
Exactly.
Well, and
exactly.
changing habits too. I mean, like wearing a mask. That's very akin to when seatbelt laws went into fruition, where everyone had to wear a seatbelt. It's the same kind of thing. It takes a little while before you know it. You're not even thinking about it, and you're doing it. Hopefully, that won't. But I think we're almost in that stage now. Learn thinking. It's just, and you feel that that's where we're going to be at. I had a question for you, Don, on when the market segmentation that you threw out on that, whether it was not hiring, and you're showing that in a pie graph, and I was curious, how does that compare? And maybe I missed it because there was a lot of data behind the scenes there on everything.
Sure.
But how does it compare those pie segments to the size of that market prior to COVID? In other words, is that piece of the pie growing or shrinking, or is pharma is a bigger slice of the pie? So
yeah,
are they growing more or shrinking less than the other ones because everything's 100% right in there?
Yeah.
So and pharma might make up a larger component of the hiring. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. How did it change?
That's a fantastic, the relational change, Mark. And by the way, I love your analogy about seatbelts and masks. I'm committing that to memory. But what I probably don't have, I'll start there first, is a great feel for I guess the fundraising and the business itself being impacted by COVID. I can speak to the hiring aspect, I think. So out of our three questions, my best guess certainly on the fundraising side, we have seen some huge rounds. I mean, absolutely enormous venture rounds. And, I've also seen data, and probably a lot of people on this call have, that the first half of this year, the life sciences sector raised almost as many dollars as all of 2019. I think we can at least interpret to a degree on the COVID question where companies are with that now. I think I feel like I've talked with enough organizations that either run labs or have labs and manufacturing facilities to know that they've adapted, if you will. What I probably would really do on the hiring front, is probably refer, put a personal plug in here for our Life Sciences Pulse report and the Q2 data there, which is, for those that are interested, we can certainly get you signed up for that. But the summary data for the industry, contained in that report, because it was also conducted over the same, roughly period of time, which would be helpful to think about. But the med tech sector was actually down pretty significantly, which again goes to why it was a bit of surprise in the small segment that came to me as a surprise, that our primary data didn't correspond with the much larger picture. And just briefly, for those that don't know what I'm talking about, our Life Science Pulse report, just what it is briefly, is it tracks all ads in the life sciences sector in the United States. And we do that on a quarter-over-quarter basis so that you can actually see answers to Mark's question. And we look at each individual segment, such as the medical device industry, the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry, which would prototypically contain names like, say, GSK or Pfizer, and then the research testing and labs industry, and those would prototypical names there might be a Covance or a LabCorp, Quest, diagnostics and groups like that. So research and medical technologies groupings. And what we prototypically tend to see, and that's a long-winded answer, but what we prototypically see is the medical device sector went down, fairly precipitously, a number of advertisements in Q2. We do expect in Q3 that's kind of bottomed out, and our expectation is that's going to start to climb. The pharmaceutical industry did just fine. They were still up in Q2 in spite of all of this. I think it was 2 or 3%. And then the RTM segment was also down a bit. I'd have to look exactly what it was. It was single digits up, as I recall. But that also, because it contains big names like IQVIA, LabCorp, Quest, et cetera, those tend to some degree, it contains a lot of the CROs, which, again, tend to trend downwards a bit if the biotech, and pharmaceutical sector, because they're reliant, of course. Many of those companies are reliant on pharma doing well, on biotech companies doing well. As a percentage of the sum total, medical devices dropped a bit. Pharma held roughly its own. RTM also dropped a bit. Hi, Rachel.
Hi. Is my mic working?
It is. I can hear you fine.
Just making sure. I had a follow-up question similar to, I believe it was Mark's. Not necessarily specific sectors, but in all of 55% of people were not hiring and 45% were. Pandemic statistics for even like 30% not hiring, 70% were. Large group.
So the larger group. So the question is there a larger group kind of demographic to compare to the group of 100?
So in the pie chart, those same categories pre-pandemic.
Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, I'm going to be candid that I didn't compile that data. We do have the Life Sciences Pulse report, which is in the first quarter of this year, blew it out by double digits.
Okay.
So, again, what you saw is a year that was going to, looking very good. Then COVID hit and, kind of did. Actually, it wasn't a steep curve down. It was 12%. This past quarter. And again, that measures the number of ads posted, which is, probably not as good at the end of the day as primary data. I'd rather talk to the CEO of a company than look at somebody who's posting ads, but this, again, it's a much larger data set. So you're talking about hundreds of thousands of ad posts to be able to compare one to another. It's a great question. I wish we had the foresight to do this in the Q1, but really what stimulated the idea of doing this at all was really serving as a dashboard, honestly, to our business. Like where should we direct, maybe some of our efforts, and who's kind of hanging in there with COVID-19 and all. And then it dawned on me. I was like, boy, I bet. And obviously we can't give out the names of the companies we talk to, but I bet I said, as I was doing this, I said, well, I think other people might find this of value if we show it on a holistic, kind of basis. So great question. And I'm sorry that we don't have the data to answer it.
I have another question for you as well.
Sure.
In your that you interviewed, were they from specifically or around the country?
Around the country. Okay. All U.S. based, though. I will tell you that. All U.S. based.
And one last question for you. One statistic I was surprised about was that the infectious disease, I can't remember, focus area was declining, even though government funding is.
That surprised me too. But the only thing I can say about that is that it was a very small portion of this overall sample set. So infectious disease as a focus area, and again, I'm happy to see this slide. It only represented 5%.
Okay.
So there were only 5 companies we talked to.
Okay, that was.
I mean, if you want to think about it like that. So again, you can't. It's hard to draw too many hard conclusions from some of this. I do think we can see some themes, but I wouldn't read too much into that, because it was a very, if we had talked to 100 companies that were involved in infectious disease, I don't think we'd probably see that same number. I guess that's what I'd say. So.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Good question.
Thanks for being here, Mark. John. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your help.
Bye-bye.
So we've got Eric on as well.
Yeah, Rachel had answered my question. Asked my question. I was gonna focus on the pie chart. Are they from overseas or domestic markets? Because I understand a lot of companies such as Fujifilm, they're expanding heavily into the European market.
Sure, absolutely. Yep. Our data set we focused on this was exclusively the U.S. markets. Although I do hear about expansions in other places as well. That's a great comment. I do think we're gonna, I do think this quarter is going to be a bit stronger, and it's going to be hard. I will tell you though, if you look at the Pulse report, the Q3 of last year was the best quarter in the past 3 years. It was over 20% in every category on a year-over-year gain. So our comps this year, even though I see things improving, there's no way we're going to beat Q3 of last year. Absolutely no way. What my hope is though is that we see that kind of sequential improvement from Q2, which I'm pretty certain we will. But it's really good. It's really hard to best numbers, if you've got your strongest quarter in 3 years. It's going to be hard for the quarter coming after COVID to best that for sure. So anyway, sorry for pontificating there, but Eric, did you have any other questions, or Rachel?
I think another question I had, if you were able to share, is do you know what region in domestically that people are expanding most aggressively? I would imagine that the Triangle area would be one of the top areas. I know that I think a couple of the RTP companies have already announced that the CDMOs are expanding their facilities. But
right.
If you, from your survey, is it just the NC cluster, or are there other clusters that they're expanding in?
It's a great question, and I would echo your answer to that, in that I continue to read press releases as well as talk to a number of people. We do have, maybe 25% of our firm's revenue comes from North Carolina-based companies, so we do have a good strong working knowledge of this area. And I would just echo your observations, Eric, that this market is a very robust one. I do think there are others as well. And when we did this particular report, we didn't really segment by by region, I suppose. But I do see North Carolina mentioned quite a bit in as far as organizations that may be either relocating, or potentially what we've seen a lot of also is a cohabitation. So maybe the company's headquartered in Massachusetts, California, New Jersey, but they have a some area of business in the state. But I do think that there are other states also that are expanding. I don't really see. I didn't really see a lot of evidence of slowdown in some of the other areas where we spoke with people.
My last question would be: is of the people you surveyed, do you know what kind of job skill set they're looking for? Are they mainly more experienced, seasoned field, or are they looking for people that aren't starting their career path in biotech, or is it more just even across the board? I was just wondering to see what you.
Yeah, and that's a great question. Again, that's not a question we specifically ask them. In some cases, we would ask them about skill sets that that they'd seek to hire, say in 1 to 3 to 6 months time. The next or the follow-on question might look something like, what skill sets might you require in that time? And of course, that's going to help us as an organization understand a bit better. We didn't really quantify it for purposes of this particular presentation. I guess at a gut level, my sense is that companies would probably continue to hire across a wide swath of different skill sets. Now, that said, there are probably some skill sets, bioinformatics, data analytics, certainly if you have manufacturing experience in the biologics sector with reference to CDMOs, quality assurance, regulatory, I think there are certain skill sets that are going to be and continue to be in high demand. And I think even our Pulse report points out one of the questions that we look at is the top skill sets in that report. And if it's okay, at the risk of just not maintaining eye contact here, I'll read off the Q2 what we call the hard skills, or these are the most advertised for skills in the second quarter of this year anyways. Pharmaceuticals, GMP, biotechnology, biology, clinical trials, auditing, new product development, oncology, medical devices, and selling techniques. So these were, I suppose, the top queried or advertised terms, hard terms in terms of skill sets in Q2 of this year.